are the results of some of the largest scientific studies ever conducted. We usually, not all of us, but most of us have the same aim. We would like to grow old, but in a healthy way. Stay vital, like the Dr. Wareham, a colleague of ours, who practiced open heart surgery up to the age of 95. So we always hear that life expectancy doubled in the last 150 years, which is correct. But we made relatively very little progress if you look at the life expectancy at the age of 65. So we eliminated hunger, infectious disease, and infant mortality in the Western countries, and these were the big gains. However, these gains become more and more futile. Recent studies show that if we heal cancer or even cardiovascular disease, it will add very few years to our lives. We should more focus on delaying aging, or at least not increasing the aging progress by our lifestyle and diet, which we are doing at present actually. So my lecture will be more about not adding stuff, but reducing stuff. Well, the basic problem, I think, is well known, that we used to run around 30 kilometers per day to gather food. Nowadays we drive around at 130 kilometers to gather our food, but we don't consume any calories doing that, so we get more and more obese. Nutritional scientists are quite clear that actually our intestinal setup, our dentition, our enzyme setup, which means no vitamin C production, poor uric acid degradation, and our history of development indicates that the human being can eat everything, but is best suited for a plant-based diet. Of course, in the Ice Age, we did differently, but that was an emergency with a very low life expectancy. Recent studies on longevity are the Blue Zone studies. You may know the book of Dan Buettner. So scientists investigated these zones in the world where people lived exceptionally long, a lot longer than people surrounding that. I will present you two of them. There are a couple of more. We will go more in depth into Okinawa and the Adventists in California. So these people show common behaviors. On the physical level, they are physically active in their daily life. They are no athletes, no Lance Armstrongs. They eat moderately and a plant-based diet. They eat some animal food, but very little. And they usually didn't smoke. So, of course, the social and emotional component is very important. We see positive relationships in family, friends, job, and so on. And they have a good life-work balance. There is a balance between relaxation and activity, sympathicos and parasympathicos, which is very important and which got lost in our times. We are very much overspeeded. So, very interesting is the importance of meaning of life. This is something that psychiatrist Viktor Frankl first demonstrated, and it also is clearly shown that these people who often got over 100 years of age in a healthy way had a meaning of life, a purpose, which was very important. And 97% of these people belong to an active faith community. Now, Okinawa is interesting because it's not a recent phenomenon, but a very old one. It's called the Isle of the Immortals. And you see with that, do we have a laser pointer or something? That would be quite helpful. Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. As you can see in this saying, it's a very ancient phenomenon. Interesting is that they were the longest living people until recently. The women still are, the men are not, because they changed to a Western diet. So traditionally, not nowadays, they ate like this. Their main calorie intake was from sweet potatoes, which is rich in potassium and carotenoids. They ate very little animal products, little fish, like 15 grams daily, and little fat in total and little animal protein. That's how they ate for centuries before the Americans arrived, and found they were undernourished and started their schooling program. Now the young generation is amongst the most obese in Japan. So we come to another group. Whilst all these groups are losing their longevity edge because of loss of culture, the Adventists are maintaining their edge and have therefore been promoted to the longest living people on the planet now. These are parts of the Adventist health studies, which are very high level studies financed by the NIHS and by the World Cancer Research Fund. So already the Adventist Health Study 1 showed that healthy living vegetarian Adventists lived an average of 13 years longer than their fellow Californians. That means practically a doubling of healthy pension time, my dear colleagues. So they didn't do so much to live healthily. They were vegetarians, ate little dairy products, interestingly. They ate 4 times a week nuts. They exercised 3 times a week intensely, and they had a body mass index below 26, the men, and yeah, they didn't smoke. That's not spectacular, but the result is spectacular. You see here that actually the interesting thing is that men don't have to die early. They can attain the same age like women. It's our male lifestyle that cuts our life short. It's not destiny. So the Adventist Health Study 2 with 100,000 participants has shown very interesting results. Vegans, those who ate, I have to mention that amongst the Adventists, they all have a focus on healthy lifestyle, but 50% are omnivores and the rest are vegetarians or vegans or pesco-vegetarians. So there's a big variation in diet. Therefore, these studies are so interesting because you have big differences, which normally lack in Western diet. More or less, if you look around, people usually eat pretty much the same. So the Adventists don't, and it showed that the vegans weighed per average 14 kg less than the omnivores. They had the least hypertension and type 2 diabetes. And the omnivores had a 4 times higher risk of diabetes than the vegans. So all this is already connected to the acid, base, and mineral content, because the vegans also had the highest intake of potassium and magnesium, and the omnivores the lowest. So the vegan diet in women reduced the cancer risk by 34%, and in men, the prostate cancer risk was reduced by 37%. These are not small studies. This is a very high level, large study done really independently, which is quite rare. And for large studies, these are very significant results. In my book on prostate cancer, I also demonstrated that, and I see it with my patients, that actually a plant-based healthy diet really lowers PSA quite quickly. So this is a colleague of ours, Dr. Wareham. He retired at the age of 95 from open heart surgery. And it's interesting that he became a vegan watching the arteries of the people he operated, and he has been one for the last 50 years. Now he's more taking care of his huge garden. He is now beyond 100. So these are not only epidemiological data that show it, it's also, you may be familiar with the clinical studies of Dean Ornish, the doctor of Bill Clinton. You may know the story of Bill Clinton, who had a heart attack, 4 bypasses, and then after a while 2 stents, and he finally followed Ornish program, and since then, which was 2010 he got the 2 stents, he's fine. So he demonstrated that you can reverse coronary heart disease by a low-fat, plant-based diet, by physical activity and relaxation and group sessions very significantly. He showed that in his Ornish group, the angina pectoris attacks were cut down by 90%. The study went on for over 5 years, and the follow-up was impressive. In the control group, the coronary heart disease progressed whilst the stenosis were reduced in the intervention group, with the result that the control group had 2.5 times higher risk of serious cardiac events. So you may be aware that he made more recent studies with prostate cancer, where he showed similar results, And you may be aware that he made very interesting studies showing that actually the telomere length lengthened in the people who followed this program. So this is a real science-based anti-aging program at very low cost. For men, I would like to mention that one study, as it's especially important. Being cranky and angry raises infarction risk by 8-fold. Therefore, I think that relaxation part of the Ornish intervention is important, especially for men. So, interesting enough, people followed his program, a high compliance, whilst the control group followed the American Heart Association program with very little success. So, at the bottom of all this is the metabolic syndrome. In Germany, it is over 40% of men who suffer from it by now. It is the breeding ground from which we have abdominal fat, we have electrolyte disorders we will address, we develop cardiovascular disease, diabetes, kidney damage, and cancer. So all the lifestyle diseases come from that. At the bottom, you have insulin resistance. Insulin is a highly anabolic hormone. It makes us first tall, and we grew a lot in length, then obese, and finally ill. Insulin resistance is caused by fat-laden cells. If we develop a fatty liver disease, which is already now also at around 40 to 50% of the people, we develop central insulin resistance, and if the fat is in the muscles, we have peripheral insulin resistance. So the consequence is permanently increased insulin levels to counter-regulate that. And this leads to increased cholesterol, increased sex hormones, especially estrogens, blood lipids, increase in heart rate and blood pressure. And it is also a circle in our reward and addictive system that insulin influences. So the consequences we described, it's important to know that insulin and insulin-like growth factors like IGF-1 are very strong growth stimulators. Also, not only for healthy body cells, but also for cancer. That's why the World Cancer Research Fund's first recommendation is actually stay slim your whole life to prevent cancer. In this assembly, you all are aware of the glycemic index and the glycemic load. The same guys who developed that, like Jenny Brand-Miller, developed also the insulin index, which is actually a lot more important because it shows the insulin reaction a food triggers. So you may know Walter Willett, one of the most famous and best medical doctors in science. So you see that glucose is set with insulin index 100. So what's interesting is if you look at fruit yogurt, it has a low glycemic load, 1/4, but it still reaches almost the same insulin secretion in the pancreas like pure glucose. If you look now in skim milk, it's even lower, high insulin index. If you look at a steak, which has 0 carbohydrates, it releases 27% more insulin than pasta al dente. Who thought that? So tofu, which has little carbohydrates, makes a very little insulin secretion, just as white beans. And I would like to indicate that these Blue Zones people, they all had as a main protein source legumes, pulses, not animal protein. So legumes are especially healthy, actually. So what is very interesting is if you look at steak and potatoes, a typical Western diet, this makes a very high insulin secretion compared to pasta with lentils, like a more Mediterranean dish, which is like half the insulin secretion with the same glycemic load almost. So the problem is the insulin, really. By the way, if you add cola to anything, then you get always high insulin secretions. So what happens? The Western diet means animal protein plus fast carbohydrates like sugar or white flour or baked potatoes. So certain amino acids cause insulin resistance, and especially saturated fatty acids cause insulin resistance. That's bad. But that diet also causes very high insulin levels. So it's double bad. If you go on a low-carb diet, it's a little improvement because the insulin will go down, relatively speaking, but you still cause insulin resistance long term. That's why low carb long term is not good either. So if you go to more a low fat or Mediterranean diet or the Ornish diet or the Asian diet actually, you see they had with their diet neither causing insulin resistance nor hyperinsulinemia in spite of eating carbs. So this was biochemistry, and now the large epidemiological data actually shows exactly the same. The EPIC studies showed that animal protein increased the risk of diabetes by 118%, whilst food with high glycemic load, which is bad, increased it only by 27%, whilst fiber-rich food lowered the diabetes risk. And a very large meta-analysis and follow-up study done by Harvard showed that 50 grams of processed meat like burgers or sausages increased the diabetes risk by 50%. So this is not much, 50-gram processed meat, and this is a large increase. However, if you replace that processed meat by nuts or whole grain food, you decrease your diabetes risk by 1/3. Also, other studies are showing this, that with a delay of 10-20 years, you have an increase of diabetes and cancer if you eat a lot of, especially animal protein. So now we come to another part that is usually underestimated. If you eat the food I mentioned, like animal-based food, you don't only get a lot of saturated fatty acids and usually a lot of cancerogens from the way it's made, like PAKs in frying and steaking, but you also get relatively little magnesium, potassium, and a lot of salt. Usually, human beings used to eat 10 grams of potassium per day, and even just 150 years ago, we ate in Germany and probably also in France and Belgium around 5 grams of potassium, mainly potatoes. Nowadays, we eat potatoes as crisps, so instead of the potassium that leached out, we get the salt. So the potassium-sodium ratio just flipped in the opposite. But this is very, very important. We are the only mammal with hypertension. And most energy, like 1/3 of our energy, is consumed by the sodium-potassium pump. So this pump has a lot more work to do if you disturb the natural sodium-potassium balance in food. If you look what the Okinawians eat traditionally, you can see that they were over 5, no, I started late. It's over 5 grams of potassium. In Germany and France, we're probably at around 3 grams. In America, the official recommendation is 4.7 grams of potassium because it's so important to prevent strokes, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. We eat far too much sodium, not the Okinawas. They ate a lot of magnesium, little calcium, but they did well because they didn't need so much calcium because they ate a diet which were rich in organic alkaline minerals, like potassium citrate in potatoes. The DASH diet also is more alkaline forming and very rich in these electrolytes. So at the bottom is the ratio of potassium. We nowadays have a deficiency and an overload with salt. That means that within the cells, we have a sodium overload and a potassium deficiency. That goes along due to the pump situation with a calcium increase and a magnesium decrease. That means our membrane potentials are decreasing. So we become more triggered, we become more nervous, more stressed. Insulin resistance is very much connected not only to insulin, but also to these electrolyte balances connected with insulin, like potassium and magnesium. The muscle tone increases, and that's how blood pressure increases. And of course, cardiac arrhythmia is a follow-up of it, as well as cancer, because cancer cells are very high usually in sodium and low in potassium. So hypertension is the death reason number 1 by now. Then comes smoking. Interesting is that it was shown that potassium softens the vessels while salt stiffens it, but only in the presence of aldosterone. But most people are nowadays high in aldosterone because of stress and too much fat. So this is the deadly mix. As long as you do sports and so on, it will be fine. I started a little late, and which wasn't my mistake. Sorry, you can't cut my... Well, first you put me first, and then we started late. So that's not good. I will finish my lecture if you... Yeah, I know, but... so we see that potassium supplements actually lower the risk of strokes by 64%, especially in hypertensive persons. The science is very clear. And the big problem is that salt stiffens not only the arteries, but the whole electrolyte balance blows up the erythrocytes. Also, too much protons do that. So you have actually stiff erythrocytes and stiff vessels, which is a very bad mix leading to stroke and infarction. So summing up, meat products, dairy, sugar and white flour are the stuff that make us fat, and salt is the deadly stuff that causes the real problems and kill us. Thank you. So I am studying and quoting over 1,400 studies in my book. I developed a nutritional and lifestyle program based on eating, which is not enough, on relaxation by deep breathing and deep sleeping, which is very important and underestimated, and exercise, but with joy. The purpose is to reach a balance in the pH, so the electrolytes, the redox system, and in the hormones, insulin being the most important one. So there are 3 basic rules. The first one is usually overseen even by Harvard, the importance of drinking lots of liquid. Especially in the morning, we have dehydrated by half a liter. The risk of stroke and heart attack is tripled. So drink half a liter in the morning directly after getting up. So eat a full plate of plant food in all colors, but watch for food sensitivities which are going more and more common. So don't know what you can't, what's not good for you, it's not good for you. Don't go according to theories. Choose food with a high micronutrient density, a lot of vital substances, and a low caloric density, and high potassium and low sodium. I developed a food pyramid that is multidimensional and considered all these aspects that I described before. So it's not based on forbidding any food, but it's based on giving indication what you should eat a lot of and what you should minimize or eat in moderate consumptions. So you may be afraid that you starve by that, but actually I went through that experience myself. I was well on the way to developing a metabolic syndrome and weighed 10 kilos more with high cholesterol, high triglycerols, etc. My wife lost 20 kg and we see very good results in reversing carotid stenosis, normalizing hypertension, and so on. I spare you the pictures. I'm eating a much more variety of food nowadays because I had to find new foods. And that's a lot more healthy and is a lot of fun actually than eating the standard Western diet. It only sounds frightening in the beginning a little bit. So, yeah, if you're interested in more on that, that's the book Mr. Pieter published. Thank you very much, Marco. I will be sitting outside. There's a small plan for patients where you have the practical parts, how to implement it in your life. All right, sorry for speeding up a little bit. Do we do the questions now or at the end? Thank you very much for your attention.
To fix it, and these people are strongly traumatized. So in strong trauma, you're in an alert response, or in a flight-fight response, and in that time the intestinal wall is not perfused adequately with blood.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's another question, maybe a reaction here. Yes. Take the microphone.
La question, c'est pour docteur Évrard. Est-ce que les plantes vont augmenter un petit peu la DHEA, puisque on a...
Our left, I forget your name, next to Dr. Fletcher's. In your research paper, you had a quote, or you had some kind of research about IGF-1 going to cancer. Can you tell me what research you're quoting and where you found that information?
Well, there's tons of IGF-1 on cancer, which I quote in my book. This is one study by Levine, but there are many others.
In the States, there was one study done by Harvard, and we debunked it.
That's correct. There's also one by Harvard.
Yeah, I don't believe it. At least, well, IGF-1 LR3, they've never proved it.
Well,
IGF-1 is very marginal right now. It's not proven.
It's all of the growth factors. EGF-1 is one. The main point is all the anabolic hormones that cause great length and obesity also cause cancer. That's why that's one of the very few really proven things with cancer. It's correlated with body height and obesity. Just also consider the update of the World Cancer Research Fund on prostate cancer, which just confirmed these findings. EGF-1 is mainly increased by dairy products. That's why if you feed kids milk and sugar, they grow very quickly and get pickles, acne. And there are plenty of them in my book.
Okay, well, it's good to have several different opinions. Maybe you have a question? Dr. Everard, Benoit.
So is there